I've been digging graves at Fernwood Memorial Park for 18 years, and before that I spent a decade in landscaping. So I know soil, I know roots, I know how things grow, and how they don't. What I found 3 weeks ago on a Tuesday morning, October 8th, specifically, has me writing this down because I need someone to know, even if I never send it, even if no one ever reads it. My hands are still shaking. The exhumation order came through on a Monday afternoon. Samuel Weeks, plot 447C, deceased 3 years prior, cause of death ruled strangulation, unsolved. The family wanted him moved to Green Hill Cemetery across town. Ashley Weeks, his daughter, was 32, and looked like she hadn't slept in months when she came to finalize the paperwork. She kept touching her throat while she talked, an unconscious gesture that made my skin crawl. She mentioned the groundskeepers had been complaining about his gravesite for over a year. Animals wouldn't go near it. The grass died in perfect circles around the headstone, and 3 separate visitors reported feeling hands around their necks while paying respects. Management wanted him gone. The family wanted him somewhere peaceful. I just wanted to do my job. We started the dig at 7 in the morning when the October mist still hung low over the grounds. Me, 2 crew members, and Carl Ramos, our cemetery arborist, who'd been called in because of concerns about root damage. Carl's been managing trees here for 23 years. When we exposed the top of the concrete vault at around 9:15, he went completely silent. I remember the exact time because I'd just checked my watch, calculating how long until we could break for coffee. The vault was supposed to be smooth, clean concrete. Instead, it looked like something out of a nightmare, completely encased in a network of roots so dense you could barely see the structure underneath. Thick, pale roots, some as wide as my forearm, wrapped around the entire vault in layers, pulsing slightly in the morning air as we disturbed them. I say pulsing, and I know how that sounds, but that's the only word for the subtle movement I saw. Carl knelt down, ran his hand over the root mass, and his voice came out hoarse. "Isaac, there's no tree within 50 feet of this plot. These roots, they shouldn't exist here." He was right. The nearest oak was plot 430, a good 70 feet away, and these weren't oak roots anyway. They were smooth, almost translucent in places, with a texture I'd never seen in 3 decades of working with plants. We called Dr. Laura Finch, a botanist from the university, who sometimes consulted on cemetery landscaping issues. She arrived by 11, took one look, and I watched her face lose all its color. She kept saying impossible under her breath while taking samples, measuring thickness, photographing from every angle. We had to cut through the roots to access the vault seal. I used a reciprocating saw, starting on the eastern side where the growth seemed thinnest, though thin is relative when you're talking about roots that had cracked straight through reinforced concrete. The saw bit into the first major root at 11:43. I know because that's when everything changed. The root didn't just cut, it bled. Not sap, not moisture, but actual blood. Dark, viscous blood that ran down the concrete and pooled in the excavated soil. I dropped the saw. Carl backed away so fast he nearly fell into the pit. Dr. Finch made a sound I've never heard a person make before, something between a gasp and a sob. Jennifer Moss showed up around noon. She lived next door to Samuel when he died, found his body 3 years ago, and she'd been stopping by his grave every month since. She looked gaunt, her hands covered in soil stains that she explained came from trying to keep her garden alive. "Nothing grows anymore," she said, staring down at the exposed vault. "Not since I found him. Everything I plant just withers, like something's drinking the life right out of the soil." She wouldn't come closer than 10 feet from the edge of the excavation. We got the vault open at 2:30 that afternoon. The seal had been compromised, roots forcing their way through cracks in the concrete, and when we lifted the lid, the smell hit us first. Not decay, but something green and growing and fundamentally wrong. The casket interior was completely overtaken, roots threaded through every surface, and in the center, what remained of Samuel Weeks. His skeleton wasn't just surrounded by roots, it was consumed by them. Woody tendrils grew through his ribcage, wrapped around every vertebra, threaded through his pelvis and legs. His skull was caged in root growth so dense it looked deliberate, like something had built a prison around his head. The roots extended from his mouth, his eye sockets, the base of his skull spreading outward and downward into the earth beneath the casket. Dr. Finch took samples while the medical examiner photographed everything. She worked in complete silence, her hands steady, but her eyes wrong, like she was looking at something that had broken her understanding of the world. Later, she told me the growth ring analysis was conclusive. The roots had sprouted exactly 3 years ago, the day Samuel died, August 15th. They'd grown at a rate that defied every principle of botany she knew. Plants don't grow like this, she said, sitting in my office at 4:45 that afternoon, staring at her soil samples. They can't. This is 3 years of growth that should have taken 30. And the cellular structure, it's plant tissue, definitively. But there are anomalies in the vascular system that I can't explain. The blood came back from the lab on Thursday. Samuel's blood type, O negative. The DNA matched samples from his medical records. Carl called me Friday morning, his voice shaking so badly I could barely understand him. He'd done a full survey of the underground root system using ground-penetrating radar. Isaac, it connects to 17 other graves, all deaths by strangulation, going back 40 years. There's a network down there, all linked, all growing from the bodies. I stopped sleeping after Tuesday. When I close my eyes, I see Samuel's face in the bark of every tree at Fernwood. Not carved, not imagined. His actual face, pressing out from inside the wood, mouth open in a silent scream, roots extending from his throat down into the soil. I see them in the oak by the chapel, the maple near the maintenance shed, the row of elms along the eastern fence. Ashley called me yesterday, said she's been having the same dreams since she was a child, long before her father died. Dreams of him trying to warn her about something growing beneath the ground, something that's been there longer than the cemetery itself. The official report called it unusual botanical growth, cause undetermined. The exhumation was completed. Samuel was cremated at his daughter's request. They wouldn't risk reburial, but I've been back to plot 447C 4 times since Tuesday. The hole's been filled, reseeded, marked for monitoring. And every time I visit, there's new growth. Small shoots, pale and translucent, pushing up through the soil in patterns that look almost like reaching fingers. I went to trim one yesterday, just before sunset. My hands were steady until the pruning shears closed around the stem. Then I felt it, a pulse, something moving beneath my feet, a tremor in the earth that shouldn't exist. I looked down and saw them spreading under the grass, a network of roots flowing toward me like water, like something aware and searching. I don't believe in ghosts. I believe in soil composition and growth rates in botanical science. But I also believe what I saw, what I felt, what bled when I cut it. And every night now I dream of the trees in Fernwood, filled with faces, all of them trying to scream through wood and bark, all of them warning about something still growing beneath us, something that's been feeding on the dead for longer than any of us have been alive. The cemetery board filed everything as an anomaly. The families were notified. Life goes on. But I can't stop thinking about those 17 graves, about what's connecting them, about what happens when the roots finally reach the surface. If you work in a cemetery, if you tend graves or manage grounds, pay attention to where nothing grows. Pay attention to the patterns in the soil. And if you ever see roots where no tree should reach, don't cut them. Don't touch them. Just walk away. Some things are better left buried.
Hello, YouTube family. Thanks for watching. Big love to our subscribers. You keep this channel alive. Only about 20% of viewers are subscribed, so if you enjoy the chills, hit that subscribe button. It's quick, it helps a ton, and it means more stories coming your way. See you in the next one, if you dare.
I keep a small notebook in my truck where I log every exhumation I've worked. 33 years of digging graves at Lake Forest Memorial means I've seen a lot of families say goodbye twice. Once at burial, once when they need to move their loved one or settle some legal matter. I write down the date, the name, the plot number, and usually one detail I want to remember about treating that person with dignity. The entry for May 14th sits on a page by itself because I couldn't bring myself to write anything after the basic facts. Some things resist documentation. Some things make you question whether you want to remember it all. The court order came through on a Monday morning, May 6th. Judge Harold Flynn's office sent over the exhumation request for Allison Grady, plot 1847, deceased 5 years prior. Estate dispute. The paperwork said her daughter Tessa and her sister's family were locked in probate over some property holdings and asset claims that couldn't be resolved without examining the contents of the grave. Sam Geller, the estate attorney, called me personally that afternoon. His voice had an edge to it, I couldn't quite place. Dwight, I need this done carefully. There may be documentation we missed, something buried with her. The family's been fighting for 18 months over what Allison intended, and we're hoping something in the casket might give us clarity. I told him what I tell everyone. I'd treat Mrs. Grady with the same respect I'd want for my own mother. We scheduled the exhumation for Thursday, May 14th, starting at 6 in the morning before the heat set in. I brought my regular crew, but I did the actual opening myself. After 3 decades, I know how to break a seal without damaging what's inside, how to handle remains with care even when they're nothing but bones and fabric. The concrete vault came up clean at 7:30, and I remember the morning light was that particular shade of gold that makes everything look almost holy. Sam Geller was there along with Tessa Grady and a forensic examiner named Evelyn Wu, who'd been hired to document anything we found. Tessa was 36. Thin in a way that suggested months of not eating properly, her eyes ringed with the kind of exhaustion that goes deeper than missed sleep. The casket seal was intact. I checked it 3 times before I broke it because I wanted everyone present to see that no one had opened this casket since we'd closed it 5 years ago on September 3rd. I've got the burial record in my files. I was part of the team that lowered Allison Grady into the ground, and I remembered the service because Tessa had read a letter she'd written to her mother, something about regret and words left unsaid. The seal gave way at 7:52, and the smell that rose up wasn't the usual decay. It was dry, dusty, with a faint trace of roses that made no sense, given the condition of the remains. Allison's skeleton was arranged exactly as we left her, hands folded over her chest, the remains of her burial dress still draped across the bones. But there, tucked beside her right hand, where it shouldn't be, was an envelope. White, clean, unsealed flap, tucked in, rather than glued. My hands went cold when I saw it. Evelyn Wu leaned in with her camera, taking photographs from every angle, her breathing audible in the morning, quiet. The envelope had writing on the front in blue ink that looked fresh enough to smudge. For Tessa, open when you're ready to know the truth. I've opened a lot of caskets. I've found jewelry that families forgot they'd buried, medals, photographs, letters written before death and placed with the body. But I've never found something that looked like it had been placed there yesterday, inside a casket that's been sealed for 5 years underground. Sam Geller reached for it, but I stopped him. We document first. We photograph. We maintain chain of custody. My voice sounded steady, but my pulse was hammering in my ears. Evelyn Wu handled the envelope with gloved hands, placing it in an evidence bag, noting the time 8:04 and the condition. No water damage, she said. And her voice had gone quiet in that way that means someone's trying to stay professional while their mind is screaming. No deterioration. The paper's clean. Tessa made a sound, something between a gasp and a sob, and I saw her hand go to her mouth. That's my mother's handwriting, she whispered. That's exactly how she wrote my name. We moved to the cemetery office for the opening. Judge Flynn had driven out personally by 9. Unusual for probate matters. But Sam had called him with enough concern in his voice that the judge wanted to see this firsthand. The 5 of us stood around my desk, me, the judge, Sam, Evelyn, and Tessa, while Evelyn used a letter opener to carefully break the envelope's seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded once, with handwriting that covered both sides in neat, measured lines. And tucked inside the fold was a pressed flower. A rose, deep red, with petals that still held color and shape like it had been pressed last week. Tessa went completely white. That's from my garden, she said, her voice barely audible. I planted roses last April for Mom. She always wanted a rose garden, but we never had space when she was alive. Those are the only red roses I have. She looked at Judge Flynn, then at me, her eyes desperate. My mother died 5 years ago. I planted that garden last spring. How is there a flower from my garden inside a casket that's been sealed since before that garden existed? The letter itself was worse. I watched Tessa read it, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold the paper. It was from Allison, not a letter written before death, and somehow preserved. The content made that impossible. It referenced specific events from the past 3 years, family arguments that had happened during the estate dispute, details about hidden bank accounts and property deeds that Allison had apparently never told anyone about when she was alive. The safety deposit box at First National is under my maiden name. One line read, Harold knows which one. The key is in the music box on Tessa's piano. Sam Geller went rigid when Tessa read that part. We've been searching for documentation of that account for a year, he said. Your mother mentioned it once, years ago, but we could never find any records. Judge Flynn asked the obvious question. Could she have written this before she died? Hidden it somehow? Had someone place it in the casket? But Tessa shook her head, tears streaming down her face now. My mother had dementia for her final 2 years. She couldn't write her own name, let alone compose something like this. And she never knew about the estate disputes. They started after she died. She couldn't have known what to tell us. Evelyn Wu took the letter and the envelope for analysis. Her report came back on May 20th, and I was there when she presented it to Judge Flynn, because he'd asked me to attend as a witness to the discovery. The paper was manufactured 8 months ago, she said, showing us the watermark analysis and fiber composition tests. Premium stationery, sold at a specific store in town that hadn't opened until 2 years after Allison's death. The ink was standard ballpoint, applied between 6 and 9 months ago based on oxidation patterns. There's no scientific explanation for how this paper and ink ended up in a casket sealed 5 years ago, Evelyn said, and I watched her hands shake as she turned the pages of her report. I've tested it 6 different ways. The results are consistent. This letter was written recently and somehow placed inside a sealed grave. The information in the letter was accurate. Sam Geller found the safety deposit box, found the key exactly where the letter said it would be, and inside were documents that resolved the entire estate dispute. Allison had been meticulous about her wishes, had hidden assets specifically to ensure they'd go to Tessa, had written instructions that made everything clear. The family dispute ended within a week. The judge closed the case. Everyone got what Allison had apparently wanted them to have. But it was the postscript that I can't stop thinking about. The last line of the letter, written in that same neat handwriting, said, I watch you garden every morning, Tessa. The roses need more water. I'm so proud of the woman you've become. Tessa called me last week. It's been 4 months since the exhumation, and her voice on the phone sounded hollow, scraped clean of something essential. Dwight, she said, I need to know if you resealed the casket properly, if you're sure no one can get in. I told her yes, that we'd done everything by protocol, that her mother was at rest. There was a long silence. Then I found another letter this morning, on my kitchen table. Same handwriting, same paper. It talks about my job interview next week. Tells me which questions they'll ask. Dwight, I only decided to apply for that job yesterday. I haven't told anyone. I didn't know what to say to her. I still don't. I go to Allison Grady's grave sometimes, usually early morning when the light is that same gold. It was the day we opened her casket. The grass has grown back over the disturbed earth. Everything looks peaceful, undisturbed, normal. But I think about that letter, about the rose that shouldn't exist, about the date on the paper and the ink that was applied years after burial. I think about what it means if the dead can see us, if they can know things they shouldn't know, if they can reach back into our world with information and warnings and pressed flowers from gardens they never saw bloom. I'm religious. I've always believed in an afterlife, in souls that persist beyond death. But I believed in separation, in a boundary between the living and the dead. I don't know what I believe anymore. The notebook entry for May 14th just says, Allison Grady, plot 1847, exhumed per court order. I couldn't write the rest. How do you document something that shouldn't be possible? How do you log the moment you realize that maybe the dead aren't as gone as we need them to be? Tessa won't return my calls now. Sam Geller resigned from the case the day after the final ruling, said he's taking a leave from estate law entirely. Evelyn Dibiu's report exists in Judge Flynn's files, marked as evidence but never explained, never resolved, just filed away under case closed. But I keep thinking about that postscript, about Allison watching her daughter garden, about what it means to be watched by someone who shouldn't be able to see anymore. Someone 6 feet underground in a sealed casket, in plot 1847. I wonder what else the dead can see. I wonder what they know about us that we don't know about ourselves. I wonder if every grave I've ever dug contains someone who's still watching, still writing letters on fresh paper, still pressing flowers from gardens that bloom in a world they're supposed to have left behind. And I wonder, late at night when I can't sleep, what letters might be waiting for me when my own grave is finally opened. I'm writing this because I need someone to know what I found before I decide what to do with it. 20 years digging graves teaches you that the earth keeps secrets. But it also teaches you that some secrets shouldn't be kept. My name is Ray Sutherland, and 6 weeks ago I excavated a grave that's made me question everything I thought I understood about death, about time, about the woman I watched walk into Pinewood Cemetery at midnight 3 days ago and never come out. The exhumation order came through on September 9th from an insurance investigator named Patricia Byrne. She was 50, sharp-eyed, with a kind of careful pronunciation that meant she'd spent years testifying in court. David Fox's death had inconsistencies, she told me over the phone. He died in a car accident 6 months prior, March 15th, single vehicle collision on Route 9 at 2 in the morning. His widow Christine collected $400,000 in life insurance, but something about the death scene bothered the company. Brake marks didn't match the impact pattern. Blood spatter suggested he'd been moved post-mortem. They wanted the body examined by an independent pathologist. I told Patricia what I tell everyone. I'd handle it with care and document everything precisely. I've always treated exhumations like archaeological digs. You never know what story the grave is going to tell. We started work on September 12th at dawn, just me and my assistant Kyle Monroe. Kyle's 31, has a geology degree, approaches grave digging with scientific precision that I appreciate. The morning air had that September coolness that makes you grateful for physical work. David Fox's plot was in Section D, Row 17, a newer part of the cemetery with flat bronze markers instead of headstones. I remember Christine Fox from the burial. She'd been beautiful in that way that doesn't seem quite real. Like a photograph from another era, wearing a vintage-style black dress and a veil that covered most of her face. She'd stood perfectly still during the entire service. Hadn't cried, hadn't spoken to anyone. At the time I'd thought she was in shock. Now I wonder if it was something else. We hit the concrete vault at the expected depth, 7:30 in the morning. But when Kyle cleared the soil from around it, his shovel struck something below the vault that shouldn't have been there. He looked up at me, confusion clear on his face. "Ray, there's another surface down here, below the vault." I climbed into the excavation and felt it myself. Another hard surface approximately 4 feet below the first casket. I've exhumed graves from plots that were reused after a century, found old caskets beneath new ones when cemetery records got confused or lost. But this was a plot purchased new in March. There shouldn't have been anything below David Fox. We called Patricia Byrne. She arrived by 9, watched us carefully excavate around the lower obstruction. It was another concrete vault, older style, the kind we used in the 50s and 60s before modern ceiling systems. The cemetery records showed only one burial in this plot. David Fox, March 20th, 6 months ago. I checked 3 times. Kyle pulled up the plot survey on his tablet. Single occupancy, purchased by Christine Fox 2 weeks before her husband's death. I felt something cold settle in my stomach when I realized that timing. She'd bought the grave plot before he died. We removed David's vault first, set it aside, and then began work on the lower vault. Patricia insisted we document everything, took photographs from every angle, made me narrate into her voice recorder what we were seeing. The second vault came up at 11:15, and the concrete was definitely older. Had that particular weathering pattern you see on mid-century materials. The seal was intact, but corroded. Kyle used a chisel to carefully break it, and when it gave way, the smell that rose up wasn't decay. It was preservation chemicals, formaldehyde, the scent of old-style embalming that they don't use anymore. The casket inside was steel with bronze handles, a style popular in the 1950s. I know caskets the way some people know cars. I can date them by design, by materials, by the way the manufacturers changed their approach over decades. This one was probably 60 or 70 years old. Patricia's hand was shaking when she took photos of it. "This isn't in any records." She kept saying, "This grave shouldn't exist." We opened the second casket at noon. I remember the exact time because my watch alarm went off. I'd set it to remind me to call my wife, tell her I'd be late for lunch. I never made that call. Inside the casket was a woman, remarkably preserved, wearing a wedding dress that made me stop breathing for a moment. It was ivory silk with lace sleeves, a fitted bodice, a full skirt. I'd seen that exact dress 6 months ago at David Fox's burial. Christine had shown me a photograph of her wedding day when she came to finalize the burial arrangements, said she wanted to remember happier times. The woman in this casket was wearing the same dress. But it wasn't Christine. The face was similar but different. Older features, different bone structure, like a relative or maybe a grandmother. Her hands were folded over her chest, and clutched between her fingers was a photograph, protected in a clear plastic sleeve that had yellowed with age. Kyle lifted it carefully, and we all stared at what it showed. A man and woman on their wedding day, standing in front of a church, the woman in that ivory dress. The man was David Fox. Same face, same build, same slight scar above his left eyebrow that I'd noticed when we buried him in March. But the photo was old, developed on paper stock that hadn't been manufactured since the 1950s, with that distinctive color shift that happens to mid-century photographs. Patricia Byrne's voice came out hoarse. That's impossible. David Fox was 38 years old when he died in March. This photo is from 70 years ago. Kyle was staring at the woman's face, then at the photo, then back at the woman. Ray, he said quietly, look at the date on the back. I turned the photo over. Written in faded ink, David and Margaret, June 14th, 1953. We opened David's casket at 1:30 that afternoon. I've seen a lot of bodies in various states of decomposition, but David Fox looked wrong. 6 months in the ground should have left him still recognizable. Still, mostly intact with modern embalming. Instead, he looked ancient. Skin like leather, bones showing through in places. The kind of deterioration you'd see on remains that had been buried for decades. Patricia called in a forensic anthropologist that evening, and the preliminary examination was completed by the next morning. The bone density, the tooth wear, the cellular breakdown, everything suggested David Fox's body was approximately 70 years old, not 6 months. I went to see Christine Fox on September 14th. She lived in a Victorian house on Maple Street, the kind of place that looks like it hasn't changed since it was built. She answered the door in a dress that could have come from any decade, her hair perfectly styled, her face calm. I asked her about Margaret, about the photograph, about why there was a second casket in her husband's grave. She smiled at me, and it was the saddest smile I've ever seen. Ray, she said, some people don't get to die just once. Some people have to keep trying until they get it right. Then she closed the door in my face. Patricia Byrne filed her report on September 15th. The insurance company launched a full investigation. The police got involved, started looking into Christine's background. That's when everything fell apart. Christine Fox didn't exist before 7 years ago. No birth certificate, no employment history, no records at all until she appeared in town in 2018 and married David 3 months later. The house on Maple Street had been abandoned for 40 years before she moved in. Walter Gibbons, the retired cemetery superintendent, came by my office on September 20th. He was 68, memory fading, but something about the case had triggered recognition. I remember a burial in 1953, he said slowly. Young woman named Margaret died the day after her wedding. They never found her husband. He disappeared the same night. Plot 47D, row 17. That section wasn't developed then, just empty field. We buried her there because the family wanted somewhere isolated. Said she'd have wanted privacy. Plot 47D, row 17. The exact plot where we buried David Fox 6 months ago. Christine disappeared on September 23rd. Her car was found at the cemetery gates at 6 in the morning. Driver's door open, engine running, her purse on the passenger seat. Security footage from the entrance showed her arriving at midnight, walking through the gates in a wedding dress. The same dress. The footage cut out at 12:07, just static for 3 minutes, and when it came back, she was gone. The police searched the entire cemetery. They found nothing except fresh flowers on David's grave. A bridal bouquet in the style of 1953, tied with a ribbon that had somehow stayed pristine despite being left overnight. Kyle quit 2 days after Christine vanished. Said he couldn't sleep, couldn't stop thinking about the photo, about David's ancient body, about the woman in the second casket who looked like Christine but wasn't. Patricia Byrne called me last week. Said the investigation was being closed. Insufficient evidence of fraud, she told me. But her voice was empty, mechanical. The insurance payout stands. Case resolved. She hung up before I could respond. I've been back to plot 47D 7 times since then. I go at dawn, before anyone else arrives, and I stand there looking at the ground that we excavated and refilled. Both caskets are down there now. We reburied them together, David and Margaret, or David and Christine, or whoever they really were. The grass has grown back. Everything looks normal. But every time I visit, there are fresh flowers. Always bridal bouquets, always in 1953 style. Always perfectly preserved despite weather and time. Walter Gibbons called me yesterday morning, his voice urgent in a way that made my hands go cold. Ray, I remembered something else. Margaret's last name before she married. It was Sutherland. I checked the old records. Margaret Sutherland died June 15th, 1953. He paused, breathing hard. Ray, isn't that your... I hung up on him. I haven't answered his calls since. My wife's name is Christine. We've been married for 7 years. Last night I found a photograph in her drawer while looking for stamps. It showed a man and woman on their wedding day, standing in front of a church. The woman looked like my wife but older. Different. The man looked like me. The date on the back said June 14th, 1953. I'm writing this at my kitchen table. It's 3 in the morning on October 3rd. Christine is sleeping upstairs, or the woman I call Christine is sleeping upstairs, and I've been sitting here for 2 hours trying to decide what to do. The cemetery plot next to David and Margaret's has my name on the deed. I don't remember purchasing it, but the paperwork is in my filing cabinet, dated March 1st of this year, 6 months ago. The same time Christine Fox bought her husband's plot. I think I understand now why some people have to die more than once. I think I understand what David was trying to escape and why Christine kept following, kept finding him, kept bringing him back. I think I know what's waiting for me in plot 47D, row 17, and I think I've always known somewhere deeper than memory. If you're reading this, it means I went to Pinewood Cemetery one last time. It means I walked through those gates and didn't come back. Don't try to find me. Don't exhume the grave. Some patterns are meant to repeat forever, and some loves don't end when they should. The woman upstairs just called my name. Her voice sounds exactly like my wife's. I don't know if it is my wife, or if it ever was, or if it matters anymore. I'm going upstairs now. I'm going to lie down next to her and close my eyes. And if you ever buy a cemetery plot before someone you love has died, walk away. Just walk away and don't look back, because the earth keeps secrets that shouldn't be kept, and some graves are dug for people who aren't dead yet.